Firstly, in terms of the present situation with a lot of quantitative easing having taken place in UK, USA and elsewhere, what you see as the issues which will arise as that quantitative easing is in a sense withdrawn, or do you think it can be successfully withdrawn, or is that going to generate further problems and issues for the particularly financial stability?
Well, the danger that I think is appreciated and that I think was reinforced by what happened in markets after Ben Bernanke started to talk about potentiality for tapering, is that markets are always trying to look forward. And what they see is that once you get a process of getting back to normal underway, that this is likely to occur, to continue. So the markets are always looking sort of for the first step towards going back to a world of positive nominal interest rates, back to some kind of normal level, which you might say might be 3.5 or so. And they're trying to think where is the timing going to be. And so there's a fear among central banks as you take that first step, and then the markets will immediately assume that this will lead to a whole series of future steps. And so they're inclined to, as soon as you start taking the first step towards normalization, the long rates will shoot up because the markets will incorporate in their expectation a whole series of future steps. And that is really rather a problem. I mean, the worry is that you take your first baby steps and the market will jump on you. And there's a difficulty in what you do with that. I think it's a serious problem. One of the things that you might have to do is that as you begin to, say, taper at the short end or even put up the policy rate a bit at the short end, that you might have to buy more at the long end in order to prevent the long rates shooting up. And alternatively, and I know that it's sort of too clever by half, and one of the things that I've sometimes thought is that instead of having the first step, because all steps are now 25 basis points, you make the first step 1 basis point, and then you see what the market does. And
you shock the market.
And the problem of getting back to normality is that the market is always trying to anticipate what you're going to do next, and that's the difficulty. And the thing is, once you start on the ladder of going back, the market will anticipate each further rung in that ladder and sort of jump to the top of the ladder, or where it sees the top of the ladder, in terms of its views about long rates. It's not going to be easy.
Prior to the financial crisis, there were many claims made for a great moderation, and other phrases were used, and that often was based on the view that there was a new set of policy arrangements, inflation targeting, independent central banks. I wonder what your views are in terms of the impact which the financial crisis has had on perceptions of what would be the appropriate objectives of central banks in terms of should it still remain inflation targeting or should it be broadened in some way, and in terms of also then the development of the policy instruments which might go alongside in that sort of change?
Well, it has been broadened, and the central banks now have a much broader canvas. And it's not only inflation targets. They haven't given up inflation targets. And speaking personally, I would not want them to give up inflation targets. But alongside inflation targets, they've certainly been given an objective to maintain financial stability. And effectively, the old idea that you could mop up after the event if anything went wrong on the financial stability side. So you just did your inflation targets, and then if there was a crisis, you cut interest rates, and that would be enough, which worked in a number of cases. But that's no longer accepted. So we've now got to do central banks have got to do financial stability as well. And I think it goes slightly beyond that, in that given the constraints on the use of fiscal policy because of the high debt ratios and the high deficits, there's a view that monetary policy should have more of a concern over a longer period than in the past for growth as well. Which strikes me as a bit odd, because if you look at the US and if you look at the ECB, and the inflation rates are actually below their target. So they ought to be even more expansionary insofar as they can be already without even having to worry too much about growth. Now in the UK it's slightly different, because in the UK for a variety of reasons we have had more inflation, and there I think is no doubt that although I don't think the Bank of England knew that there was going to be inflation and allowed it, once the inflation had occurred, they're in no hurry to try and tighten up to achieve that inflation target, so long as growth remains so low and unemployment remains so high.
Do you think, Professor Goodhart, central banks should be concerned with the level of unemployment, especially 2013?
Yes and no. I think that central banks do not know, and nobody else knows, what the natural rate of unemployment is, if that concept has any reality, and I don't know whether it does. So that I think that it would be wrong for the central bank to have the objective of a level of unemployment. I think that would be quite wrong, because you don't know where it is. And it can be affected by a whole series of fiscal and other measures, the way the social security system works, the way the unemployment benefit works. We have no idea what the natural rate of unemployment is. We just don't. But at certain times we do know, or at least we think we know, whether the level of unemployment is significantly above or significantly below whatever the natural rate might be. And under those circumstances, I think that it is perfectly fair to say that if unemployment clearly is deviating from the natural rate, whatever that may be, that it is something one should take into effect, if only in terms of the horizon over which one is prepared to get back to the inflation target.
So where we are in 2013, are we in the first type of situation, or is second one where...
We're in the first type. And I think that we're in a world in which the Bank of England certainly believes that the natural rate of unemployment is below 7%, which is the point at which it's said that it will reconsider interest rate policy. And in America, it's the same point. They're saying that wherever the natural rate of unemployment is, it is below 6.5%. So that they're saying we don't know where it is, and we're not in the long run going to target unemployment, because it would be a wrong thing to do. But we know that unemployment is significantly different from where it ought to be, wherever that might be. And during that period, we are going to condition our interest rate decisions on the level and rate of change, if you like, of unemployment, as well as the inflation target itself.
So I suppose you welcome the words of the new governor of the central bank in the United States, the Fed, Janet Yellen, that she's concerned about the current situation of unemployment in the United States. And what do you think the ECB, which you didn't mention before, should really do, given the particular dire condition of unemployment in Europe?
Well, I think the ECB is as aware as anybody else that the great failure and what is missing in Europe at the moment is any policy for growth. And they simply don't know how to get there. The inflation rate in Europe, in the Eurozone, is falling below the target. And under these circumstances, the ECB whose mandate is to have concern with the Eurozone as a whole, should be considering more expansionary measures. But beyond that, there is a great distributional problem within the Eurozone, which is not easy for the ECB by itself to deal with, though I think that Mario Draghi's policy of the OMT, the outright money transactions, was a brilliant step. And it had a great effect, great positive effect, and actually it didn't involve them doing anything so far. And it's a work of genius where you can introduce something which you don't actually have to do and yet affects markets dramatically.